So Kamala Harris is finally being honest about how she felt about Biden running for re-election back in 2024. She's calling it reckless that this was even allowed to go down because she says it was all about one person's ego and their ambition. We're going to talk about it because is she a little too late or is she just being honest? Now, today we are going to be diving into Kamala Harris's book, 107 Days. Now, the book has not been released yet, but there was a 3,000 word excerpt from the book published in The Atlantic, which has been making the rounds. Now, in what has been making the rounds, Kamala Harris comes out and talks about how she really felt about Biden running for re-election back in 2024. And she's questioning whether this was loyalty, a great decision, or was it recklessness. And she says that it was reckless for her to allow him to move forward with running for re-election during that time. Now, this is interesting because, as you guys know, we have all been waiting to hear an honest truth about how she really felt watching Joe Biden run for re-election, knowing that he shouldn't have, knowing that even in this 3,000 word excerpt, Kamala Harris still says that there was nothing, that there was no big scheme to cover up the fact that Joe Biden was incoherent. She says, many people want to spin a narrative in some big conspiracy at the White House to hide Joe Biden's infirmity. Here's the truth as I lived it. Joe Biden was a smart guy with a long experience and deep conviction, able to discharge the duties of president. On his worst day, he was more deeply knowledgeable, more capable of exercising judgment, and far more compassionate than Donald Trump on his best. But at 81, Joe got tired. That's when his age showed in his physical and verbal stumbles. I don't think it's any surprise that the debate debacle happened right after 2 back-to-back trips to Europe and a flight to the West Coast for a Hollywood fundraiser. I don't believe it was incapacity. If I believed that, I would have said so. As loyal as I am to President Biden, I am more loyal to my country. So don't get Kamala Harris twisted, right? She is still saying, look, we weren't trying to cover up the fact that there was anything wrong with him health-wise, despite the fact that the man is 80-some years old, and when he gets tired, things begin to slow down. And this was after a long work week. But, now, I don't believe this part of it, but I do appreciate her being honest to other parts. So we're going to get into exactly what she says. So the excerpt in The Atlantic starts on the day that Kamala Harris went to go speak in front of a sorority called Zeta Phi Beta. It is a part of the Divine Nine, which are the Black Greek organizations. Sororities and fraternities make up the Divine Nine. Kamala Harris is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, aka, which is one of the first Greek letter organizations. Now, I remember when this happened, and the room was full of about 6,000 people when she went to go speak to them. I remember when this happened because Kamala got so much slack for deciding to go here or go there and speak to the women of Zeta Phi Beta instead of going to another highly publicized event. And she says it in the excerpt that I read as well, that, if unless you really understand the connectivity, the importance and the power of the Divine Nine of Greek letter organizations, Black Greek letter organizations, you don't understand why she chose to be there. But at this point, she's very early in everything, the race conversations, everything. So going to her core where it really mattered and made sense, even if they weren't directly saying that's why she did, us, Black people, we knew what sis was doing because we knew, and we still know to this day, the importance of community amongst Black people, especially Divine Nine Greek organizations. Not only do they run culture on HBCUs, but even following graduation into the world, the Divine Nine gets busy. So she talks about being there and she says, Kamala Harris says, I was in a room full of people with whom, because of our shared experience, certain words did not need to be said. Oh, baby, I felt that. There's an emotion that comes from being in a place where people see you, support you, and know you. The kindness and the love in that room penetrated the armor I usually wore. Armor I'd need to put back on as soon as I left that room. Now, Kamala Harris does talk about in this episode a bit, just feeling overlooked, undervalued, her position not, being one of substance or treated like it was one of substance behind the scenes, and how her team had to fight for her often. We'll get into that.
So once she speaks, she opens up in that setting with Zeta Phi Beta and says, she's giving her speech and she's like, and when I become president, and she talks about how loud the crowd cheered. And let's take a listen to that speech, actually.
Well, let me tell you something. When I am president of the United States, and when Congress passes a law to restore those freedoms, I will sign it into law.
Now, reading this excerpt and understanding kind of where she was and some of the things that she was dealing with. When I say where she was, I mean just like mentally and spiritually. It seems like in reading this excerpt, Kamala had gotten almost to a place of autopilot a bit, in my opinion, because she talks a lot about, having to prove her loyalty in the office over and over and over again. She talks a lot about her team having to fight for her for certain things. She says, I was well aware of my delicate status. Laura has it that every outgoing chief of staff always tells the incoming president chief of staff, rule number 1, watch the VP. Because I'd gone after him over busing in the 2019 primary debate, I came into the White House with what we lawyers call a rebuttal presumption. I had to prove my loyalty time and time again because she wasn't the biggest Biden fan in the beginning of all of this, which was no secret. But Biden at the same time, and that's why, oh my God, like as a Black woman reading this, the feeling that I hated, and it's crazy because I feel like as Black women, as Black people, we have like a language that we speak with, sometimes without even saying words. It can be hand gestures. It can be the way you move your head. It can be, the laugh, the giggle, the side eye. And a lot of Kamala Harris's responses, whether she was in debates or she was at speaking engagements or, anything public eye, when we saw her, there were so many times where that language was happening between us and her. But a lot of what she's talking about here in this excerpt, I feel like we knew, especially Black women. I feel like we knew that there was a lot that she wanted to say and wouldn't or couldn't, that she wanted to do and wouldn't or couldn't. And I also think that as Black people, we knew that pushing for her to get on the ticket with Biden and making that one of the, you have to do this if you want us to vote for you things. I feel like we in my opinion, as a person that voted for the Biden Harris campaign, I wanted our support and us rallying together and our pressure that we put on Biden. I wanted that to be a message to Kamala that they had to tread lightly with her. They had to talk to her very nice because she had all of us behind her if they did not. When she got in the White House, I felt like even if she felt like that, or at one point felt like that, she had to put it to the side. It was like she had to play nice. She had to dress up, smile, wave, the duality of Black people, the code switching. She had to do all the things, which we know that's a part of the walk and talk of a Black person in America. But we put her there because we wanted her to feel comfortable enough to say, fuck all that. And that is not what happened. So she continues and she says, she's talking about former Mayor Willie Brown. When Fox News attacked me on everything from my laugh to my tone of voice to whom I dated in my 20s or claimed I was a DEI hire, the White House rarely pushed back with my actual resume. 2 terms elected DA, top cop in the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, senator representing 1 in 8 Americans. Loren vows, my chief of staff, constantly had to advocate for my role at events. She's just not going to stand here like a pouted plant. Give her 2 minutes of remarks. Have her introduce the president. They had a huge comms team, but they had Karine Jean-Pierre briefing in the press room every day. But getting anything positive said about my work on any defense against untrue attacks was almost impossible. Now, that right there is tea. Because, it's the White House. So, of course, they have a huge comms team. But her pointing to the fact that they had Karine Jean-Pierre briefing in the press room every day, another Black woman, but getting anything positive said in defense to my attacks was almost impossible. And I don't know. And look, I think, the way that normally works is like when people remove themselves from politics, we find out about their truths about the politics they dived in and the work that they did. Like, I think Karine was also in a position as well too, where it's like you got to do the walk, do the dance, whatever. But I'm not excusing it, because I believe and I feel like when you're in these positions where you are one of few, one of only, you have, like, it's so crazy to even think about. It's actually kind of sad in 2025 to have to sit here and even think about how to say this the right way. When you're in these positions, especially as a Black woman, one of the biggest things I learned, especially when you're in spaces that are very white, very misunderstanding of you, your tone, your voice, your everything. And you're not particular. She's in a position of power, right? At this point, Kamala Harris, but you're not though. Like, you are, but you're not though. When you're in that position, one of the things I've learned is it's almost like playing chess. Like, you have to learn how to knock everything off the board and get to what you want done without people feeling like you're powerful or you have power. You almost have to, like, you take all the hits, you take all of the, all of the stones, everything that is thrown at you, you go through it. And then one day, randomly, the people in power standing right next to you, who for some reason were able to not be empathetic to anything they watched you experience in real time, for several reasons. Because maybe, a lot of times it's, you're a woman and they're a man, or, of course, color. Her being a Black woman has a lot to do with it. And them just not seeing the necessity or the need or understanding culturally how attacked a Black woman is, especially when she's in a position of power, and having to utilize, show, and exercise that power. The way that you have to learn duality and learn to be weak to be strong is very sad. And it's sad to hear her say that she specifically pointed out, Karine Jean-Pierre, because she's the person speaking and briefing the press every day, but also she's a Black woman in a position to communicate. She's talking about to communicate. But at the same time, I've had conversations with people about Karine Jean-Pierre and her coming out, as neither Democrat or Republican after leaving, her role and all the things, who say she was also in that same position, which is very understandable. It is very understandable, but I do think this screams to me that Kamala was looking for an advocate on the inside and did not feel like she had it, nor did she feel like she had anywhere to turn. And the people who were advocating for her, they're strength in numbers, and she didn't have the numbers. She says an example of this is in 2021. She says, I was dispatched to help reset the U.S.'s tattered relationship with France after we signed the Australia-UK-US Security Pact. Australia had agreed to buy submarines from France, but scrapped that contract when we in the UK agreed to supply Australia with nuclear subs under a new agreement instead. This had caused tremendous friction. In our meeting, Emmanuel Macron and I warmed the chill by focusing on our many areas of cooperation, such as space exploration, climate change, transatlantic security, cybersecurity, and the Indo-Pacific. On that trip, I was invited to visit the renowned Pasteur Institute, where my mother had worked on mRNA research related to breast cancer. I was speaking informally with the scientists there about how I wish politicians would more closely follow the scientific method, testing a hypothesis and adjusting according to results, rather than coming in with the plan as if they had already answered up front. I said the plan with an exaggerated emphasis in air quotes. Fox News, the New York Post, and Newmax went wild, claiming I faked a French accent. That was totally nonsense, but the White House seemed glad to let the reporting about that overwhelm the significant thaw in foreign relations that I achieved.
She seems to come forth with some sort of an accent while she's talking to French scientists at a place where they're talking science. That's like it's not a stand-up comedian zone. Let's watch.
We campaign with the plan. Uppercase T, uppercase P, the plan. We're expected to defend the plan.
So basically, they let all of the craziness fly when it came to her. You know, the nonsense news, the sensationalized headlines. You know, I remember at one point people were mad about her Chuck Taylors, like things of that nature. She says they never made it a point to point out the real work she was doing. She was the distraction. She was a test dummy. She was thrown into situations, or when situations would happen, they would use her as a distractor. She would have to bite the bullet. Even worse, she says, Kamala Harris says, I often learned that the president's staff was adding fuel to negative narratives that sprang up around me. One narrative that took a stubborn hold was that I had a chaotic office and unusually high staff turnover during my first year. The plain fact is, many people who come to work with the new administration in the White House haven't done it before. It's a job unlike any other, and not every person, no matter how talented in their former position, can step up into such a high-stress, round-the-clock role. Others find that they just don't want the job that doesn't pay particularly well, that it takes a massive toll on your family, and rules out anything resembling to a normal life. I'm not going to keep people on who can't thrive at their jobs. It's not fair to them, and it's not good for the country. So the first year in the White House sees staff turnover. Working for the first woman vice president, my staff had the additional challenge of confronting gendered stereotypes, a constant battle that could prove exhausting. I was the first vice president to have a dedicated press pool tracking my every public move. Before me, vice presidents had what's called a supplemental pool, as the first lady does, only covering important events. But because of the constant attention, things that had never been especially newsworthy about the vice president were suddenly reported and scrutinized. And we know why. First lady vice president, first black woman lady, first black woman, of course a woman is a lady, first black woman vice president. So she goes on and on and on and on. Like this episode is really, I'm actually really excited to read her book. I didn't know how much her book would be, if it would be BS, if I'm just being honest with you. I feel like whenever I get a chance to interact with people on the Democratic side, like when they come to the Breakfast Club for interviews or anything like that, I always feel that what they really feel and what they really want to say is never what you get to see and never what you get to hear. And it's really not disheartening because it's politics. I think everybody is doing the dance and putting on a cape and putting on a mask and putting on a personality persona, talking into talking points and all the things. Republicans, I think, they're a little bit more ratchet with theirs. But I didn't know if her book would be that, because at the same time, all of this scrutiny and all these things she's talking about, they're going to come again. Because at the end of the day, she's still a black woman who was in the White House. And now, and this was my whole thing too, and now she's going to be looked at as disloyal. And this is my whole thing. When everything was happening and people were like, Kamala should just come out, say what's really going on. Even before people were talking about whether Biden should run again or not, there's this code with us. And I get it. As black people, I think we have a very, what happens in the house stays in the house. That's how we're raised, right? But I think in certain instances that really, it destroys us. It destroys our voice, and it destroys the reasons why we're put in a room. When Kamala Harris was elected, I thought she was going to get in there and blow all of that up. And I mean it in the best way. I mean, she was not going to stand for things happening that shouldn't happen. She was going to speak directly to the people, to her people, to, all the people that get overlooked. And she talks about that in this episode. She says that she felt like her role was to really account for and continue to place spotlight on those communities that people didn't care about. Underserved, black women, black people, and not just us, but, underserved and uncared for communities across the board. But I think her voice was diminished. And I don't know, and I haven't read this full 3,000 words. I'm going to continue to do that on my own, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. I don't know if her voice got diminished because the lack of support and the scrutiny she felt, because everybody likes to act like they don't care, but you do. And people like to act like Kamala could have gotten there and went off and did all the things. And she could have. I believe she could have. But I think the biggest thing she probably was thinking about also is the disloyalty. And if she's being dragged for something as simple as the way she laughs and, her hand gestures, imagine what they're going to do to a young Black woman standing next to this older white man in this White House defending this country that has historically not stood for her, but stood for the counterpart and for the other. I think that was one of her things as well too. I want to get into more directly what she like where her thoughts in her her words were when it came to Biden and him running again for president. Now she says in one of the episodes, she says, Kamala says, I knew it would come off to him as incredibly self-serving. She's talking about advising him on not to run again for re-election. If I advised him not to run, he would see it as naked ambition, perhaps as disloyalty. Even if my only message was, don't let the other guy win. She also goes on in the excerpt to talk about something that they would say all the time, and you would hear her say all the time. When people would ask about the president running again and whether she thought that he was capable of becoming the president or being the president, doing the job because he was falling apart in front of our faces, she would say, she said, it's Joe and Jill's decision. We all said that, like a mantra, as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. The stakes were simply too high. This wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego or an individual's ambition. It should have been more than a personal decision. And that right there, I think, is a bold statement as well. And she's coming out swinging. Kamala Harris is coming out swinging in this book. That's a bold statement because even though in the prior excerpt, she talks about there not being this whole scam or, scheme or scandal to cover up Joe Biden being, not capable medically, physically, and just, his coherence to run for president. But I think this is what we were saying. What we were saying was that a lot of it was, okay, we're all watching this happen, but the way that it was handled, all of y'all were given a script and you guys all stuck to it. And that, to be honest with you, I think that had a lot to do with why Kamala didn't win. It was that script. Her not coming out and completely distancing herself from everything that Joe Biden did and talking about how things would be so different. And like she still, even in running for president for those 107 days, she still had to stick to this like this hopscotch, this double dutch of like, okay, I'm here and I'm what we need. But wait. Like we can't take away from what happened over here, or I'm still gonna stick to this because me running doesn't mean that I disagree that he shouldn't have ran for president. It's like a part of her was still living in the middle of all of these things. And you can still kind of feel that in this episode a bit because she comes out swinging and then she goes back and says, but I'm not saying that he wasn't capable. He was better than Donald Trump. Like, I don't know what it is about politics. I know what it is to be a Black woman, don't have to play it safe. But at this point, the gloves is off. Kamala Harris ain't playing it safe. So I'm excited to read the rest of the book. You guys let me know what you think. She ends with a very strong statement after talking about this mantra that it's Joe and Jill's decision. And she says, was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. And this was her comment on her decision and everybody around her's decision not to sit Joe Biden down and tell him, do not run for re-election. Get in the comments. I want y'all to take it out to the streets and the tweets on Twitter, Instagram, all the places. I want to hear from you guys. Do you guys think that this is a little too late? Is Kamala Harris a little bit too late in telling us the truth about Biden running for re-election being reckless? And honestly, being the reason why our country is going to shit right now.